From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Pull up a chair, friends, and settle in. There's a kind of story that only comes out at night. Not loud, not sensational, just a whisper that slides in under the door. This one takes us back to the summer of 1942. Pascagoula, Mississippi. A quiet coastal town where the evenings were warm, the windows were open, and people slept with the breeze moving gently through the curtains. But in that stillness, someone else moved too. They called him the Phantom Barber. A figure who slipped into bedrooms while families slept only a few feet away. Not to steal jewelry, not to leave a message, not even to harm. At least, not at first. Instead, he'd take a single lock of hair. Just enough to let you know he'd been there. Close. Close enough to touch. The town would never be the same. Tonight, we sit by the fire and follow the story of a mystery that left more questions than answers. A story about fear, rumor, wartime tension, and the way a quiet town can become a shadowed one overnight. This is From the Void. Pascagoula, Mississippi, was never meant to be a city that big. Before the war, it was a sleepy little fishing town on the Gulf Coast. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nobody locked their doors. Then came 1942. The war pulled the town into the national spotlight. An Ingalls shipbuilding brought thousands of new workers to the coast almost overnight. The population doubled, then tripled. Strangers crowded into spare rooms, trailers, and even church basements. By day, the air rang with the sound of industry. Metal clanging, engines whining, the rush of progress. But at night, the rules changed. Blacked out windows, no streetlights, patrols moving through neighborhoods to make sure not a single beam escaped. The government called it dim out. Locals called it living blind. And in that darkness, fear spreads fast. Whispers about prowlers, peeping toms, soldiers far from home with too much drink and too little to lose. A city straining under the pressure of war and the perfect breeding ground for rumor and panic. So when the first reports came in about a man sneaking into homes at night, no one laughed. Not in Pascagoula. Because the first victims weren't in some shadowy alley or dark street corner. They were two young girls, fast asleep in a convent dormitory. It started at Our Lady of Victories, the local convent school. Friday, June 5th, 1942. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, and two girls, 11-year-old Mary Evelyn Briggs and 12-year-old Edna Marie Heidel, were asleep in their small second-floor dormitory. Sometime after midnight, a noise woke them. When the girls stirred, they saw the faint shape of a man, standing by their bed, moving toward the open window. They later described him as sorta short, sorta fat, wearing a white sweatshirt. When the nuns rushed in moments later, the window screen had been cut, and both girls were missing locks of hair. Within the hour, police dogs were brought in. The bloodhounds picked up a scent from the convent grounds and followed it through the darkness, all the way to the edge of a wooded area near town, where it suddenly stopped cold. No footprints, no bicycle, just gone. Word spread fast. Parents checked their windows, men stayed home from late shifts at the shipyard. And somewhere in Pascagoula, a man with a pair of scissors had just made his first move. 3 days after the convent break-in, the Phantom struck again. This time, it wasn't a dormitory. It was the home of the Petey family, just a few blocks away. 6-year-old Carol Petey was asleep in her bed when her parents heard a noise. A faint scrape, like metal on wood. When her mother entered the room, she found the window screen cut clean through, and a single blonde curl lying on the pillow beside her daughter's head. Carol was still asleep. She hadn't felt a thing. But whoever had come through that window left behind one clue. A sandy footprint pressed into the bedspread. Police dogs were brought in again, and this time they followed the scent for nearly half a mile, until it disappeared at the edge of a wooded road. Investigators believe that's where the Phantom got into a waiting car, or where someone picked him up. That detail would become important, because each new incident happened miles apart, as if the prowler could appear anywhere, anytime. The people of Pascagoula began to realize something terrifying. This wasn't just a neighborhood prank or a single disturbed man. This was a pattern. And less than a week later, the Phantom's quiet obsession would turn violent. June 13th, 1942. Less than a week after the Petey home was hit, Pascagoula woke to something different. Something darker. At around midnight, the couple was attacked in their bed. Terrell was struck in the head and knocked unconscious. Lillian's teeth were shattered. Blood splattered across the sheets. By the time neighbors heard the screams and came running, the attacker was already gone. Police found no fingerprints, just the familiar sign of a cut window screen. Nothing stolen, no sign of struggle outside, and whoever did it was fast and deliberate. Again, bloodhounds were brought in. They followed the scent away from the house, through yards and alleys, and once again, it vanished at the edge of a road near the woods. Authorities began to suspect the Phantom had help, or access to a car. Someone organized enough to disappear before the alarm went out. The attack shattered any illusion that Pascagoula's Phantom Barber was just a harmless eccentric. He was violent, he was escalating, and nobody knew where he would strike next. But in the days that followed, the fear itself became the weapon, turning neighbor against neighbor, and spreading faster than the manhunt could keep up. By mid-June 1942, Pascagoula was on edge. 3 attacks in just over a week, each one stranger than the last. No one knew who the Phantom Barber was or where he'd strike next. But everyone knew one thing. He was getting bolder. Parents nailed shut their windows. Men started skipping night shifts at the shipyard, determined to guard their homes. Women slept with lights on, revolvers tucked beneath their pillows. Police Chief A.W. Ezel deputized dozens of local men. State police arrived to help patrol the streets. Bloodhounds were brought in again, and again, they lost the scent at a road leading out of town. Rewards were posted, $300 from the city, another $300 from Ingalls Shipbuilding, and more from local businesses. A small fortune in 1942. That would be roughly equivalent to $11,000 to $19,000 in today's money, depending on the inflation index used. Every night, armed patrols combed the neighborhoods. Every noise, every creak of a window became a reason to reach for a gun. Some residents swore they saw a shadow at their window. Others claimed the barber had tried to chloroform them in their sleep. Police took every report seriously, but the more they investigated, the less sense it all made. The attacks had no clear pattern. Different ages, different neighborhoods, and only one violent assault so far. But the town wasn't thinking about patterns anymore. They were thinking about survival. In the papers, he was no longer just a prowler. He was the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula, a name that made headlines across the country and cemented the town's fear into legend. And yet, as strange as the story already was, the next report would push it into the realm of the unbelievable. A victim who woke up sick, confused, and missing a lock of hair. By late June, Pascagoula had become a town without sleep. Patrols roamed the streets. Every window was nailed shut. And still, the Phantom found his way in. The next report came from the home of Mrs. R.E. Taylor, just blocks from the other attacks. She told police she woke in the middle of the night feeling dizzy and disoriented, the air thick with what she called a sickening smell. When she sat up, she realized someone had been there. A section of her hair was gone, cleanly cut. Neighbors said the same thing they'd heard before. The screen was cut, the lock still intact. But this time, there were no footprints, no barking dogs, nothing but that strange chemical odor. Rumors spread that the Phantom had used chloroform, though police never confirmed it. No rag was found, no residue. And none of the victims, not Mrs. Taylor, not anyone, showed the burns or irritation that true chloroform exposure would leave behind. The smell, whatever it was, may have been something else entirely. A trace of cleaning solvent, or maybe just the scent of fear itself. Still, the story stuck. And with each retelling, the details grew more dramatic. Now the Phantom wasn't just cutting hair, he was drugging his victims. The myth was expanding faster than the facts could keep up. By early July, the legend had gone national. Reporters from the Columbus Telegram, the Commercial Appeal, and the Brooklyn Daily Eagle all carried the story, painting Pascagoula as a town haunted by a ghost with scissors. And yet, behind the headlines, local investigators were beginning to see something else. An M.O. that didn't quite add up. One attack involved children. Another, a brutal assault. And now a case with chemical fumes but no proof. Was this really one man? Or had fear itself become the Phantom? In early August, the town finally got its villain, whether he was guilty or not. 57-year-old William A. Dolan was a chemist. Educated, quiet, and according to police, eccentric. He lived alone near the outskirts of Pascagoula. And in the summer of 1942, that was enough to make him suspicious. Police claimed to have found a bundle of human hair hidden behind his home, along with a pair of scissors. They said he'd once had an argument with a local judge who happened to be related to the Heidelberg family, the couple brutally attacked in their bed. That connection, thin as it was all they needed. Dolan was arrested and charged with attempted murder, though prosecutors quickly admitted something strange. They had no evidence linking him to the hair-snipping incidents. Still, the town was desperate for closure, and the papers had already made up their minds. The New Orleans Times-Picayune called him a dangerous German-educated chemist. To wartime America, that label carried weight. The implication was clear. A foreign-educated scientist, possibly a spy, terrorizing a war production town from within. Dolan denied everything. He said he'd been framed. He claimed the hair had been planted. But none of it mattered. After a 2-day trial, he was found guilty of assaulting the Heidelbergs and sentenced to 10 years in prison. To Pascagoula, the nightmare was over. The Phantom Barber had been caught. The attacks stopped, and life, at least for a while, went back to normal. But behind the walls of the Mississippi State Penitentiary, William Dolan never stopped protesting his innocence. And 6 years later, someone would finally believe him. William Dolan had been behind bars for 6 years when the governor of Mississippi, Fielding Wright, decided to take another look at the case. By then, the Phantom Barber headlines were long gone, and even the most skeptical locals had started to wonder if they'd caught the wrong man. Governor Wright ordered Dolan to take a polygraph test, a technology still new in the late 1940s. Dolan passed. Every question about the Heidelberg attack, every denial of involvement in the hair-snipping incidents, he cleared them all. In 1948, Dolan's 10-year sentence was suspended, and he was quietly released from prison. 3 years later, the suspension became a full pardon signed by Governor Hugh White. No new suspect was ever named. The case simply faded into history, an unfinished story filed away in the archives of wartime fear. But the story of the Phantom Barber wasn't finished, and neither was the strange life of the man once accused of being him. In 1951, police in Louisiana discovered the decomposed body of a man carrying papers that identified him as William Dolan. Authorities assumed the strange story had ended there. The body was buried under Dolan's name, and for a time, it seemed to mark a tragic close to the life of a man who had once been the town's prime suspect. A man never proven guilty, but never truly cleared in the court of public opinion. Then, a year later, the FBI ran a fingerprint check on a man arrested in California. The prints matched the supposed dead man from Louisiana. William Dolan was alive, and the truth, like the legend of the Phantom Barber, slipped once again into the shadows. By then, decades had passed. The war was over, the shipyard quiet again, and the town had long since stopped talking about hair and scissors. But the truth about the Phantom Barber was never proven, only assumed. In the years that followed, one last riddle lingered in the margins of the case. The body found in Louisiana was never identified. No one ever learned why it carried William Dolan's papers, or how a stranger came to die under his name. What we do know is this: Dolan wasn't hiding. After his release, he moved west. Most accounts say California. And he was never arrested for any violent crime again. Just a quiet man trying to rebuild his life after being branded a monster he almost certainly wasn't. It was a strange and tragic coda to the life of a man who'd been caught in the storm of wartime fear, and proof that even after the headlines faded, the truth remained just out of reach. When you look back at the Phantom Barber case with modern eyes, the cracks start to show, especially in the story built around William Dolan. Dolan was the perfect scapegoat for 1942. A chemist, educated in Germany, socially awkward, and living alone in a small southern town, still adjusting to wartime paranoia. That was all it took. He was accused of attacking the Heidelbergs, a violent assault that shared almost nothing in common with the earlier nonviolent break-ins. No hair was cut, no scissors found at the scene. Just a broken window screen, the same detail every house in Pascagoula had in common by then. The truth is, police tied Dolan to the case because they needed someone to tie to the case. They'd promised the town an arrest. they'd offered what would be nearly $15,000 in today's money for information. And when fear meets a reward that size, logic rarely wins. The supposed motive? A grudge against a local judge connected to one of the victims. But there's no record that Dolan ever threatened anyone, and the bundle of hair police claimed to find behind his home was never properly cataloged, photographed, or matched to any victim. Even at trial, the state couldn't prove the hair was human, let alone evidence of assault. The other detail that doesn't fit at all is the physical description. Based on the eyewitness description, the suspect was described as short, stocky, and wearing a sweatshirt. Dolan was described as tall, slender, gray-haired, wore glasses, and was 57 years old. Essentially the exact opposite of the description provided by the girls in the convent, and hardly the shadowy figure slipping through bedroom windows. In their report, there is no mention of glasses, gray hair, or age indicators. Then there's the bigger problem, the pattern. If the same person committed all 5 incidents, we're talking about someone whose behavior made no sense at all. First, he snips hair from sleeping girls, then from a child. Then he nearly kills a couple with an iron bar. Then he supposedly gasses a woman with chloroform, even no trace was ever found. It's no escalation, it's incoherence. Terrell and Lillian Heidelberg both survived the attack. Terrell had been struck hard enough to lose consciousness. Lillian's teeth were shattered, her jaw bruised, but she also lived. The couple spent weeks recovering, first in the hospital and later at home. And by the end of that summer, they were slowly piecing their lives back together. They stayed in Pascagoula for several years after the war, appearing quietly in local records and later moving elsewhere in Mississippi. Neither ever spoke publicly about what happened that night. No further threats, no follow-up attacks. Just silence. The kind that usually follows something deeply personal. Their recovery matters because it tells us something about motive. The assault wasn't random. It was deliberate, targeted, and fueled by anger. And that makes it almost impossible to reconcile with the intruder who crept into bedrooms just to steal locks of hair. The simplest explanation is that Pascagoula didn't have one prowler. It had several. A mix of trespassers, peeping toms, and maybe even a few copycats feeding off the panic and the press. But hysteria doesn't like loose ends. It prefers monsters. And the Phantom Barber was the perfect one. Mysterious, faceless, and just believable enough to keep people awake at night. When you look closely at the physical evidence, the legend starts to unravel. Only one case left a footprint. A single sandy print found on a child's bedspread. No plaster cast was ever made. No tread pattern was identified. No size recorded. It was never compared to William Dolan or anyone else for that matter. Bloodhounds tracked that scent through town until it stopped abruptly at the edge of a wooded road, exactly where a car might have been waiting. That detail, repeated in later cases, suggests the intruder had help or at least mobility, not a lone prowler on foot. Geographically, the attacks all occurred within a few miles of each other, from the convent near downtown to the Petey and Taylor homes west of the shipyard and the Heidelberg house a bit farther out. Pascagoula was small in 1942, so across town really meant down the street. Every scene fell within a 3 to 4 mile grid, a local's territory, not a traveler's. And in 4 of the 5 known cases, the intruder took the same strange trophy, a handful of hair, snipped from the victim's head while they slept. The only exception was the Heidelberg's attack, the one that turned violent. No scissors, no hair removed, just blunt force trauma and rage. That detail alone shatters the idea of a single offender escalating. If the Phantom Barber's crimes were evolving towards violence, the final hair snipping after the Heidelberg assault makes no sense. Instead, it suggests at least two separate offenders operating in the same fearful summer. Early investigators did consider that someone might have held a grudge against the Heidelbergs, perhaps a workplace dispute or personal feud. But again, once William Dolan was arrested, that idea was rewritten to fit him. A supposed resentment toward a judge related to the family. But there's no record that Dolan ever knew the Heidelbergs, and no evidence that link was real. When he was convicted, the personal motive line of inquiry disappeared completely. There was, however, one other theory that surfaced quietly and just as quickly vanished. Police Chief A.W. Ezel once suggested the intruder might have been a shipyard worker, one of the thousands of men flooding into Pascagoula to build warships. Transient, anonymous, familiar with blackout schedules and neighborhood routines. If the Phantom Barber worked at Ingalls, he could have slipped through the town undetected, then simply transferred to another Gulf Coast yard, or been drafted into military service when the summer ended. No similar crimes were reported afterward, and wartime secrecy meant those employment records were never made public. If that theory was true, the Phantom Barber didn't vanish into thin air. He just left with the war effort, taking his secret with him. In hindsight, the evidence paints two very different portraits. A fetishist who crept through windows for the thrill or proximity, and a separate assailant whose violence spoke of anger, not obsession. Two crimes born of two different minds, woven together by fear until the town could no longer tell them apart. Maybe there was never a Phantom Barber at all. Just fear, slipping through open windows, cutting through reason, leaving only rumors in its wake. A few locks of hair, a town that couldn't sleep, and a story that outlived everyone who ever touched it. In the end, some mysteries don't hide in the dark. They are the dark. That's tonight's story from the Void. If you enjoyed exploring the shadows with me, take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you're listening. It helps other curious minds find their way to the fire. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you have a friend who loves a good mystery, share this episode with them. The more who gather, the brighter the fire burns. I'm John Williamson. Thank you for listening and for keeping the fire burning.